Today, we are taking on a huge topic, the story of the largest empire in world history. We're going to look at how a small island nation grew into a global superpower that truly shaped the world we live in today. We'll cover its incredible rise and, of course, its dramatic fall. So let's dive right in.
To really get a handle on the sheer scale of this thing, let's just start with one number: 24%. At its absolute peak, the British Empire covered almost a quarter of the entire planet's land area. Think about that. And it ruled over more than 400 million people, which was nearly a quarter of the world's population at the time. Just staggering.
And this incredible global reach is what gave us that famous phrase. And it wasn't just some poetic saying, it was literally true. From colonies in the Caribbean all the way to islands in the Pacific, the sun was always shining on some piece of British territory.
So, the big question is, how did this all even start, right? How did a relatively small island off the coast of Europe manage to build a global empire? Well, the story doesn't begin with some grand plan for conquest. It actually starts with exploration and, maybe more importantly, with trade.
The first steps were, well, they were pretty tentative. It all kicked off with explorers like John Cabot back in 1497, who claimed some land in North America for England. But the real engines of the empire, they didn't fire up for another century. That's when you get these powerful trading groups like the East India Company. Soon after, permanent settlements started popping up, like Jamestown in 1607. This whole early period, what we call the First British Empire, was almost entirely focused on the Americas, until, of course, its most important colonies there decided to declare independence in 1783.
Losing the American colonies was a massive, massive blow. It forced a complete change in strategy. And this moment right here, this is the pivot point. It's what historians call the Second British Empire. Britain's focus swung away from the West and turned east and south towards the huge opportunities in Asia, the Pacific, and eventually Africa.
In that pivot, that's what really kicks off the empire's golden age. The 19th century became Britain's imperial century. It was a time of such incredible global dominance that it really earned that title, the empire on which the sun never sets.
After Napoleon was finally defeated in 1815, Britain was left without any real rivals on the world stage. This started a period of about 100 years of relative peace around the globe, basically policed by Britain. We call it the Pax Britannica, or British peace. For almost a century, no other country could truly challenge British power.
So how did they pull this off? How was this dominance maintained? Well, it was built on a few key pillars. First, you had the Royal Navy, which was the undisputed king of the seas, acting like a global police force. Then came technology. New inventions like the steamship made moving goods and troops easier and faster than ever before. And the telegraph? That was a game changer. It allowed London to send messages to the furthest corners of the empire almost instantly. And finally, there was the economy. Britain dominated world trade, which created a kind of informal empire of economic influence.
But at the very heart of this whole global system, there was one place that mattered more than any other: India. Once the British government took direct control from the East India Company in 1858, India became known as the jewel in the crown. It was the empire's most profitable, most populous possession, providing incredible wealth and a huge source of manpower for its armies.
Of course, no empire lasts forever. As the world moved into the 20th century, new powers like Germany and the United States were on the rise. And for the first time, the foundations of British power started to look a little shaky.
The First World War was a brutal turning point. Now Britain and its empire were on the winning side, and they even got bigger, taking over old German and Ottoman territories. But the cost was absolutely immense. The war completely drained Britain's bank account, exhausted its people, and it made it crystal clear that Britain wasn't the top industrial power in the world anymore.
So this brings us to a really crucial question. If you just looked at a map, the empire was bigger than it had ever been. But was it actually stronger? The reality was it was stretched to its absolute breaking point, and the Second World War delivered the final blows. The shocking speed of Japan's conquests, like the fall of Singapore in 1942, just completely shattered the myth of British invincibility. Prestige, once lost, is hard to get back.
What came next was one of the fastest and most dramatic imperial collapses in all of history. In the decades after 1945, the empire just unraveled, making way for a totally new world. The speed of it all was just breathtaking. It really starts in 1947 with independence for India. The jewel in the crown is gone. Just a few years later, in 1956, you have the Suez Crisis, which was a public humiliation that proved Britain wasn't a top-tier superpower anymore. By the 1960s, a wind of change, as the Prime Minister called it, was sweeping across Africa, with dozens of nations gaining independence. And for many people, the final, symbolic end of the story came in 1997 when Hong Kong was handed back to China.
So after all that, how are we supposed to think about its legacy? Well, it's incredibly complex, and people still argue about it fiercely. On one side, some will point to the spread of things like the English language, parliamentary democracy, and the building of railways and ports. But on the other side, critics point to a long history of violence, the exploitation of people and resources, and the drawing of artificial borders that still cause conflicts today. The truth is, there's just no easy answer.
But what is undeniable is the footprint it left behind. You can still see it everywhere. The Commonwealth of Nations grew directly out of the empire. English is basically the global language of business and culture. Sports like cricket and soccer are played all over the world, and the legal and government systems in many countries are still based on the British model. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. The British Empire as a political entity might be gone, but its shadow is long. Its legacy continues to influence global politics, our cultures, and even the maps we use. So the question isn't just about what happened in the past, it's about understanding how that past is still very much alive and shaping our world right now.